sometimes we'll get caught up in a singular verse that we like out of a psalm, where the message may come through the entirety of it. Sometimes
now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, sometimes one verse is a good verse to remember, but maybe that's not the whole point of the psalm. Sometimes the psalm is telling us, hey, here's bad things you need to get through, or here's how God can work through. And the happy or the
there's
bad
a
verse.
big message in the psalm. Try to find out what that is.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our conversations here with Dan.
Yes, and me and Jed are going to talk about a psalm today.
We're going to break down Psalm 32. So if you're where you can, go ahead and get your Bible out. If you're already watching on your phone, get you a physical Bible. If you're in the car, obviously keep your eyes on the road.
Get you a physical pen or something like that so you can mark on your Bible.
Yeah, this is one of those, we're going to encourage you to do some underlining, some marking, different things like that as we break down the meaning, the structure of this
Psalm 32. I think you'll like it.
Okay.
All right, let's dive in.
Let's start from the top.
So the psalm is actually broken down into some sections, and to see its breakdown is very helpful in seeing its meaning. If you'll look at the first paragraph, which is actually verses 1 and 2.
Okay.
That is a contrast with the second paragraph, which is actually verses 3 and 4.
Okay.
These two paragraphs are opposites of each other. The first paragraph, if you'll notice there, he says, how blessed is he.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But down in verse 2, he says, how blessed is the man. The blessedness is basically stating that the person spoken about in that first paragraph is a person that is in a good state with God, that is in a happy state with God, that is right in the sight of God, and doesn't have these problems that we're going to talk about below. Okay. Now, in verses 3 and 4, that paragraph is about a person who is in a bad place. He is not blessed. He is not right with God. He is not in the place that we talk about in the first paragraph. So if you take paragraph 1, which is the first two verses, and paragraph 2, the second two verses, if you'll drop all the way down to verse 10, you'll see the summary of the entire psalm, which is what? Verse 10.
All right. Verse 10 says, many are the sorrows of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts the Lord.
All right. So there you have the same contrast that you have in verse 1 and 2. I mean, in the first two paragraphs
there,
except it's in reverse. So you have the righteous or blessed man, and you have the man who's in sin in the second paragraph. You have the comparison done in the reverse in verse 10. But verse 10 summarizes the basic idea of the entire psalm, basically saying you don't want to be like these people, but you do want to be like this person.
Now that what you just talked about, the reversal, is something that's really common in the Psalms and in other passages throughout the Bible too. So that's something that just if you're studying the Psalms, be looking for this. It builds in, and then it kind of builds out in reverse.
Yeah, and you're thinking of a chiasma.
Yeah. But even when it's not one of those, that sort of idea is going to be present.
So the comparison and then the contrast may be in reverse, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So for our reference in this video, just remember that the contrast in the first two paragraphs is summarized in verse 10.
Okay.
All right. So if we look at that first paragraph, who is the blessed man? What about this blessed man makes him so happy and good? Read the paragraph for us there.
Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit.
All right. So this blessed man, this blessed person, whoever this is, their sins are forgiven. And God is not counting sin against them. Their sin is covered by God, and they have an honest heart. See, in him, there, in his spirit, there is no deceit.
Yeah.
He's the person that is good with God.
Yeah.
All right. So now look at the contrast in verse 3. The main statement in verse 3 is, when I kept silent. See, this line says, this is when I refused to acknowledge my sin. I kept silent. I hung on to my sin. I tried to to figure out a way to live with my sin, you know.
Yeah.
And I was not in this blessed state of verses 1 and 2.
Yeah.
All right. What about this guy? How did he feel inside when he kept silent? Read 3 and 4 there for us.
And when he keeps silent, my bones waste away through my groanings all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength dried up as by the heat of summer.
All right. So those statements underneath the main statement for when I kept silent, see, when I refused to confess my sin, he was miserable. He was like, you know, some of us that are old like me, we wake up and our bones are hurting, you know, but this guy felt like in his spirit that his bones were, he was in pain, and he felt like he was groaning all day.
So first, with that, you said this guy, this is a psalm of David.
Yeah, and he's bringing his experience to us.
Yeah.
All right, through the Holy Spirit.
And so do we know, like, is there any way for us to know kind of what period of his life this one's from?
We can guess.
I know some of them are specifically marked, but...
Some of them would say, well, it's in the Bathsheba thing. Some would say, well, it may be when he sinned in regard to his children. But whatever it was, he's simply talking about, we don't know in answer to your question, but he's simply saying that inside of me I was miserable. And he says there in verse 4, your hand was heavy upon me.
Yeah, what does that mean? That's one of those Bible phrases that sometimes we just go, oh yeah, everyone knows what that means.
Well, in context here, it means that he felt God pressing on him because he knew God, and he knew God was not pleased with him, and he knew that he was not okay with God. And it's like God is saying, you know you're wrong, you know you need to change, you know you're guilty, you know you need to return to me. And he felt like God wouldn't leave him alone.
So is it almost like saying my conscience was heavy? Like my conscience was eating at me?
Yes, and that was God, he says.
Yeah.
God's hand trying to show him he was wrong, and he became weak mentally, spiritually, because he could not carry this load of guilt.
I mean, that's one of those things that if you out there are thinking, some days you get to the end of the day and just you are exhausted and you're like, what have I done? But if you think about kind of that emotional rat race you had to go through, the mental rat race of trying to not say something to someone or not handle a situation, or you had to carefully craft every word you said in a situation because of all those things that were eating at you. This is kind of what he's talking about here.
Yeah, he's talking about real mental anguish, like somebody who's severely depressed or anxious because of a situation that was not okay. First paragraph, people like this are okay. They're blessed. They're happy. Second paragraph, I was not okay.
And specifically, we're talking about someone who knows their sins have been covered and forgiven, so they have no guilt in the eyes of God.
In contrast with
someone who feels very guilty in the eyes of God.
Knows they're guilty and can't stand the guilt.
Yeah.
All right. So then the third paragraph, starting with, notice the first line in verse 3, when I kept silent.
Yeah.
Notice the first line in verse 5, then I acknowledged my sin. So now I've had enough of this misery, and now I'm going to finally acknowledge my sin to God and turn to the one whose hand has been on me.
Yeah.
Read that paragraph.
So I acknowledged my sin to you. I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin.
All right. Now, I've got a New American Standard highlighted here, but I highlighted, I acknowledged.
Yeah.
I did not hide. I said.
Yeah.
See? Now, that all contrasts with the first line of verse 3 that says, when I kept silent. See?
Yeah.
So he stopped this being satisfied with his sin. He said, okay, God, I give up. I know I'm wrong. And he confessed his sin. He didn't hide it like he wasn't guilty of it.
Yeah.
He confessed his transgressions. And then, the last line of that paragraph, you forgave.
Yeah. And in the ESV it says iniquity, but yours has a word that more people are probably familiar with, is the guilt of.
Yeah, the guilt of my sin. And of course, God held him guilty. He knew God held him guilty. He couldn't bear the guilt, and he felt the weight of that guilt lifted off of him when he really got real with God and confessed and repented. And you see the power of the first paragraph. How blessed is he, whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. So he feels so good, and so, oh, this burden is lifted off my soul. Why did I wait all that time and wallow in that guilt when I could have been here?
Yeah, this is what I was striving through, but this is what I went through to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, verse 6 starts with the word therefore.
Okay.
So verse 6 is, okay, you see the blessed man and how happy he is in the first paragraph. You see how miserable the person is who's guilty and still trying to hide their sin and hasn't confessed it to God. And then you see the release that is found when you turn to God and confess. So therefore, what do we learn from this?
What are we going to do with it?
Yeah, read the therefore verse 6.
Therefore, let everyone who is godly offer prayer to you at a time when you may be found. Surely in the rush of great waters they shall not reach him.
All right, so the praying to him is I acknowledge my sin, see? So don't wait so long to acknowledge your sin.
Yeah.
What we learn from this experience in those first 3 paragraphs is go ahead and go to God when you feel that way and pray to him, because there's such blessing and release in doing that. And then David says in verse 7, being on the other side of this, God, you are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance, which goes right up to paragraph 1. How blessed is the man.
Yeah. So it's almost, don't let your guilt block you from God or keep you from God, which almost feels like a callback to in the garden when they recognized their guilt. Their first impulse was to hide, which is our natural impulse.
Yeah, stop hiding.
And David is saying, go ahead and come to God. It's worth it.
Yes, it's such a release. It's such a blessing. It's such a lifting of the burden. A reference you might look at real quickly in Isaiah 55.
Okay.
Notice it says there in verse 6, let everyone who is godly pray to you in a time when you may be found.
Okay.
Isaiah 55, I think verse 6, maybe in 7. What does it say there?
Yeah. Verse 6 of Isaiah 55, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon.
All right, so, don't stay in that sin and that rebellion and that misery and your own guilt, and then something happen in your life that you never do turn back to God. Seek the Lord when he may be found, when it's on your mind, because you'll find forgiveness, you'll find rest, you'll find pardon. It's such a wonderful lifting of all that stuff you're carrying with you, which is really advice based on what's happened in the several paragraphs above.
Now, how much of this would you say is like his practical lived out advice, and how much of it is God's commandment for his people, that we're trying to find out of this section?
Well, that's the cool thing about the Psalms, because David was a prophet. He was inspired by God. The sweet psalmist of Israel says in 2 Samuel, the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was upon my tongue. So yes, this is David's experience, but yes, also this is God's wisdom for us. And when you get to the paragraph beginning in verse 8, notice the lines of verse 8, the parallel lines, I will instruct you, I will counsel you.
Right.
The way that most of the versions capitalize things, it seems like God is now saying, okay, David, you messed up. You lived like this uselessly in your guilt.
Right.
You came to me. You're relieved. Now let me tell you how to avoid this situation again. I love this paragraph. Read God's wisdom about this whole situation, 8 and 9.
I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Be not like a horse or a mule without understanding, which must be curbed with the bit and bridle, or it will not stay near you.
See, David had been like an old horse or old mule that does not want to come with you and does not want you to ride them. And you pull on him and he just digs his hoofs in and like you're dragging him. And God says, David, and everybody else reading this,
Right.
If you'll listen to me, you won't be in this situation again. So stop being like the horse or a mule that has to be controlled by bit and bridle. That hurts his mouth.
Yeah.
And if he's hurt enough, he'll go with you. But if he's not hurt, he won't go with you. And God is saying, why don't you just go gently and willingly with God, and you'll end up in paragraph 1 up here that says, how blessed is that man.
Yeah, and I assume the "it will not stay near" is his instruction and his counsel.
No, it is the horse or the mule that won't come near you unless you drag him with bit and bridle. Okay, that's you and me when we're stubborn.
The "it" is us, so we're not saying God's counsel will leave us if we're stubborn. We're saying we're just struggling against God and we can't stay near him when we struggle against him.
Yeah, I would, instead of "it," I would use the word "he," meaning that stubborn horse or mule, which is you or I if we're in that situation.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? You or me if we're in that situation.
Well, I think that's where sometimes if you read that quickly, it's going to be hard to figure that out without the context of everything.
But structurally, see, really good place to be, really bad place to be. You finally acknowledge your sin. You receive the great blessing of freedom. Now, here's what advice I'll give you so that you won't ever be in that horrible place again.
Yeah.
Don't you want to be in that good place that's described in verse 1?
I would think so.
Yeah. So then verse 10 is the summary of the whole thing. Just real simple. What does it say?
It says, "Many are the sorrows of the wicked," so we could have it bad, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts in the Lord.
All right. Many are the sorrows of the wicked. Which paragraph describes the sorrows of the wicked?
That's up there in verse 3 and 4.
That's exactly right. See? Yeah. And then he who trusts in the Lord, loving kindness shall surround him. Which paragraph really shows you what that's like?
We're back at paragraph 1.
See now, Jed's really good. He's got it, I think.
I'm listening.
All right. So the final advice is in verse 11. Stay in paragraph 1 is what verse 11 says. Be glad in the Lord. See, where are you blessed? Where are you happy? Where are you glad? It's when you're with the Lord.
Yeah.
Be glad in the Lord. Rejoice, you righteous ones. Shout for joy, you who are upright in heart. Now notice upright in heart there in verse 11.
Yep.
And go to the end of verse 2, and what does it say?
Into verse 2, it says, "The spirit where there is no deceit."
All right, so the upright is in heart, and a spirit in which there is no deceit, that's the same thing. That's a person who's honest with himself or herself and honest with God at the same time and stays that way. And that person will be blessed, and that person can rejoice because they're with the Lord.
Yeah. So it's a great little message.
Fantastic.
Packaged together nice and neat.
But the structure of it helps you to really grasp it.
Yeah. And so these are the things that as you're reading through the Psalms, sometimes you might get distracted by the poetic language of it. But if you really take the time to break down each of these passages, like look for the paragraphs, I know sometimes some versions, they'll condense everything together. Try to find one that breaks it into a poetic form almost.
Yes, and try to find in the breakdown the progression of thought, the comparisons, the contrasts.
Notice those similar starting lines, all that sort of thing.
And, like in this one, even the spirit in which there's no deceit, the upright in heart, notice similarities like that. But this is a great psalm, and we thought you all might enjoy just breaking this thing down.
Yeah, because sometimes we'll get caught up in a singular verse that we like out of a psalm, where the message may come through the entirety of it. Sometimes
now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, sometimes one verse is a good verse to remember, but maybe that's not the whole point of the psalm. Sometimes the psalm is telling us, hey, here's bad things you need to get through, or here's how God can work through, and the happy or the bad verse.
There's a big message in the psalm. Try to find out what that is. Yeah.
Now, on the way out, something that commonly when people are studying the psalms, they get caught up. What is that word, Selah?
Oh, I meant to say that.
Yeah. Let's let them in on what that means.
So when you read paragraph 1 and 2, and then he says Selah, that means stop. That means pause. That means wait. So there's let's get this contrast in our mind from the first two paragraphs, and then let's stop. Then you have this one little paragraph by itself when he confesses his sin, he stops hiding, he acknowledges it, and he finds this great release, and stop again.
Yeah.
See? So look how good this can be and how bad this was, and look at the great thing that happened. Now stop and cogitate on that for a second.
Yeah.
Now we go on, see, to the therefore. Don't wait that long, call on God when he's near, and then Selah again.
Yeah.
And now let's listen to God's advice and get right, church. Now let's go home. So that's kind of how this thing is done.
Yeah, because remember, the Psalms are, we like to call it the ancient songbook sometimes, but these were used in worship. These were used in times of personal prayer and worship. But I would always encourage people, and I know you probably would as well, read the Psalms out loud when you have a chance. And definitely when you see that, take a break. For you music people out there, it's almost like seeing a fermata over a rest. Take a long pause and then continue on.
And do you know that, like the minaret, the Muslim minaret who's doing the prayers and so forth, if you can picture this thing being sung in a way that's very easy to understand, and then there's a pause, and then the singer picks up again and sings that next little part with emphasis, and then there's a pause.
The same would have been done for the Jewish cantors, And
that's what I'm talking about. I'm just giving them something they can relate to. Yeah. So
I know, making sure they don't think, oh, it only happened there. No, it happened in Jewish
yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, that's all we got, I think, today.
I think so.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and maybe we'll be doing another one of these in the near future. I know we've got some other questions that have come in, but
Psalms are fun.
Yeah. We're thankful for all of your comments, questions, all the different things, and we'll be back again next time. See ya.